Hi all, before we get to today's episode, I'd like to offer a brief apology to all those who have been waiting so patiently for this installment. The last few months of my life have been rocky, from the unexpected loss of my job to a rather debilitating bout of bronchitis, sinusitis, and pneumonia that was actually present during the recording of this episode. Before we get to the episode proper, I just wanted to take a second to thank all my loyal fans for their support. In particular, my good friends Ali Stoneman, Sasha M., and the co-moderator of our subreddit, Dances with Storms. You've all been pillars of strength, and I appreciate your encouragement in times when it would have been easier to quit. Thank you again, and enjoy the show. Hey everyone, Leslie Rice here, creator of The Signal with our announcements. First, I'm very glad to be bringing you an episode that will hopefully knock your socks off. If your socks remain on, then our desockification technology has failed us and the world is doomed. However, even if that is the case, this episode will be introducing some talented new actors and some very interesting new equipment that will hopefully make a good show even better. These advancements are, as always, brought to us by the generous donors who support The Signal at www.patreon.com/signalobscura. At any rate, I hope you enjoy the show, and if you do, please remember to like, subscribe, and suggest us to your friends. After all, what's the worst that could happen?
What? Who's this?
Amy, it's Miles. I have to talk. Something big has happened.
Miles? It's 3 a.m. I'm as excited as you are about this, but...
No, look, it's not the project. Well, it is, but... Damn it, I don't know if I can talk about this over the phone. I don't know if I can talk about this anywhere.
Slow down, Miles. You're not making any sense.
Okay. I just finished listening to the files the receiver has recorded, and... Amy, it was us.
Miles, if anything, that makes less sense.
I know. Can you meet? I need to show you this. Otherwise, you're going to think I've gone nuts.
Halfway there already. All right, so I can be free around noon.
No, it can't wait. We have to meet now.
And I'm all the way there now.
Amy, what I'm going to show you is proof. Absolute write-your-own-ticket proof of everything you were telling me about.
You had better bring coffee, and it had better be as black as my mood right now, and this had better be worth it.
Blacker than midnight, and I promise you won't regret this.
I already do.
This is The Signal. Point of origin, unknown. Destination, unclear. It carries with it fragments of other places, other times, stories from unfathomable pits of darkness, and worlds of unquenchable, all-consuming light. These tales of realities both unimaginably distant and terrifyingly close are woven into, around, and through The Signal. Good evening, listeners, and welcome once again to The Signal. Time is strange here. It bends, twists, and turns. By the very nature of this medium, what you're hearing could have been recorded hours, days, even years ago. The stories you're hearing may be of a past yet more distant, or of events that have yet to come. For all you know, you're hearing a tale of your future from a man long since dead. Regardless of where you are in space and time, today we present you with 3 tales. You will hear of a possible now, where a group of shut-ins confronts a great darkness outside their refuge, and an even greater one within. Together, we will travel down a road to nowhere where the dead walk, and the sins of the past lay waiting around every corner. And finally, we will step far into the past, where a symbol of healing in a desperate land brings a cure to a terrible illness, but at an even more terrible price. While time may be different in the signal, let's not waste any more of it. Instead, we will simply present you with our first story. Trust is a justifiably rare commodity in life. While one may know their own motivations, it's never possible to understand what drives those around us. Is a man driven to acts of compassion to avoid his own personal demons really a saint? Is someone who kills but with the best of intentions truly a sinner? We are all, on some level, aware of this fundamental inability to comprehend one another's nature. And the end result is fear, paranoia, mistrust, suspicion. In today's first tale, from the mind of contributor Tesco 5, the survivors of a terrible evil find themselves grappling with each of these emotions. As concerned with one another as the evil that pursues them, their allegiances are as uncertain as their fate. For when the darkness lifts, it's uncertain whether there will be any survivors, or if the rest of the world will be forced to find its own answers to what happened in Mason.
Well, what the hell do you want me to do about it? The question spat from Bradford's lips like the acrid tobacco juice that dribbled down his chin. Mr. Bradford, a surly welder of about 30 years, had until recently succeeded in his attempts to quit chewing. Tonight, however, the lump against his teeth provided a much-needed distraction. Like many of the rain-soaked patrons around him, he sat shivering, lost in the shock and sorrow that follows the last breaths of loved ones. "You're the damn welder, man. I don't know. See if you can keep this door jammed." Graham paced nervously several steps away from the others, his eyes darting between the entrance and the hastily boarded windows surrounding them all. Even under normal circumstances, Graham was an anxious man. He was short and somewhat thin, aside from a farmer's gut fostered by years of his old lady's cooking. 2 decades of mountain ranch life had left him balding and leery of others. "Do you see a fucking welding rig in here? Leave me the hell alone. Ask the damn sheriff for help, if he can stop being a useless pile of shit for 2 minutes. Bradford receded into his chair, tipping the brim of his trucker cap down. A few seats away, Sheriff Gillard ignored the insult. He did so inelegantly, lacking lucidity and purpose in the drunken stupor with which he'd numbed himself. Had he remained sober, he would have been forced to shy away from the accusatory glances of most everyone else in the godforsaken bar. Their sullen faces flickered in and out of view under the sparse candlelight, which battled meekly against the midnight dark. "Let him be," growled the hunter, Frank Larson, a lick of venom on his tongue. "Ain't your mama ever tell you not to kick a stray? Mangy bastard'll probably just mess your boot. Ain't that right, boy?" Frank looked to his son, the only remaining miner in the already tiny mountain town. Months ago, if you'd asked anyone in Mason who would be most likely to kick a stray, they would have undoubtedly replied, "That Larson asshole." His son Jack was cut from a different cloth. Jack Larson was, by all accounts, a good kid. In spite of his father's infamous disregard for law enforcement and of the regular beatings he appeared to receive, he was nevertheless polite and friendly to those around him. "Yes, sir," Jack muttered flatly. Sheriff Gillard had always been kind to him during his father's numerous arrests, and the old man's current state brought the boy no peace. "Might as well just leave him to himself," Frank continued, drilling a hole in Gillard's head with his heavy brown eyes. "Leave him to die like he did all them folks what's locked outside." Bradford aimed a generously sized globule of spit at Gillard's heels with no reaction. The syrupy muck trickled slowly down the mud-speckled boots and pooled on the wooden floorboards. Gillard managed another swig of his drink before resting his chin on his forearms. Outside, the howling winds abused the scattered evergreens and threatened what little strength remained in the roof. The rafters creaked and groaned, but despite the litany of their raucous bickering, they could not hope to fully dampen the raspy cries of those things which now stalked about the sodden exterior. "Oh, I wish they'd quit that horrid wailing," cried Dolores, the elderly waitress whose husband had died in her arms mere hours ago. "If we could have just had a few minutes of peace and quiet." She trailed off, the words catching in her throat. Young Jack left his father's side to comfort her. Frank scoffed at this behind his beefy hands as he lit a cigarette. He drew from it before haughtily whisking a cloud of thick smoke towards the bar. "Ain't been no peace and quiet in this town for weeks. All this idiot and his goon squad could do was die, and they went and made a mess of that too. Couldn't do a damn thing right when they was alive anyhow. All them robberies, them pets what's missing, Graham's livestock, hell, and then Janine." Frank's words were cut short as Walter, the barkeep, pounded his fist against the counter. It was more than he could bear to hear. Just 1 week before the attack, his wife Janine had gone missing. Before that, both the butcher's shop and Bradford's metalworks had been robbed of supplies. In the days that followed, a mass disappearance of house pets and cattle ensued. With Janine gone, the bewildered police could scarcely search the woods without accusations of incompetence by hysterical Masonites. Only Gillard had maintained his composure. He had heavily suspected Frank's involvement upon inspecting his truck and finding both a cutting torch and cleaver. Frank had, of course, claimed ignorance to their presence. As the investigation continued, the town became increasingly convinced of Frank's innocence and disgusted by what they came to consider harassment by a desperate sheriff. Any progress at this point would have been made in vain. The people had spoken. By the time the shadows had descended upon them, Mason's finest were already helpless. The survivors sat quietly, looking to Walter as he shook with a mixture of rage and grief. His fist remained planted on the counter, knuckles whitening around his tightened grip. "Oh, Walt," Dolores sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Walt. My Timothy, your Janine, and now your little girl." She sank, weeping and heartbroken. Walter buried his face in his arms, falling forward to the countertop. For 30 years now, the denizens of Mason could rely on Walt and Deli at the Oxbow to help them celebrate their highs and forget the lows of such isolated living. Now that their regulars were gone, the pair found themselves inextricably bonded amidst the death knells of a ghost town wheezing its last. "Damn it, would you two knock it off?" Graham yelled angrily. "We have no idea if those things are coming back for more, and if they do, we'd better be ready." "Ready?" Dolores asked incredulously. She rose to her feet and shook her finger at Graham, who now approached, ready to argue. "Ready for what, exactly? To defend ourselves? How has that worked out for anyone, "I just say we should be keeping an eye open, that's all," Graham said, irritated but somewhat ashamed. "If we could at least board up the windows some more. I don't like the way they're looking at me through the cracks." "Graham, we can't just pretend like nothing went wrong out there. We have to have time to grieve, to think about what's happened." "Goodness sake, Dolores, you want to join them? We're all that's left. We have to." The door smashed inward with an almighty gust of wind, thrusting its splintered planks into a torrent of explosive fury. Several found their way into Graham's chest and throat, dropping him to his knees in pain he'd never known. In came the cold and the dark. All lights, feeble as they had been, were instantly snuffed out. Dolores screamed. "Shit, they're back! Get down!" Bradford yelled. He jumped for Dolores, and the two of them dove to the floor. The shadow's misty forms hissed around them, unseen but for the intermittent flash of lightning strikes and the burning scarlet of their eyes. The survivors scrambled about blindly under tables, shielding themselves from the oppressive flailing of elongated claws. Dolores sobbed uncontrollably as Bradford attempted to hold the table in place. The wind howled with profound strength, shaking the skeletal remains of the door and forcing it to smack against the adjacent wall repeatedly. Even with free access to the interior, countless more shadows remained at the windows. They pounded their fists against the brittle walls frantically, seeking to tear the crooked old shack apart. Through the clamor, the others could hear Graham being pulled outside. He clawed at the door with dwindling strength, the agonizing scrapes growing fainter into the wilderness. They ultimately faded altogether, and Graham was gone. Sheriff Gillard, partly sobered in terror, had found his way to the old breaker behind the bar. He threw his weight into the rusty switch, jolting the overhead lights awake with a spark. The scene they revealed afflicted all who bore witness with such prodigious torment that most could only stare, paralyzed with both fear and remorse. Around them stood the town of Mason. Young, old, lost friends and nuisances alike, each writhing in diaphanous ink-black smoke. Their eyes, stolen from their shimmering faces, had been replaced by burning coals. They seethed and sputtered at the edges, forming and reforming ad infinitum. Their frames, twisted and narrowed, had sprouted needle-like appendages about them like whip spiders. There was something undeniably feral about them, and yet something more. A distant ember of humanity pulsated within, tortuously fettered to an unnatural violence that held them prisoner. The monstrous simulacra squealed in agony, shielding themselves from the light as they darted for the exit. Sensing the opportunity, Bradford shook himself to action. The lights! Walter, are there any flashlights back there? Gillard, toss me that mag light. Get 'em trained on that doorway, now. The welder rushed about the tables, praying for some semblance of security. Moments later, a lone bar stool stood sentry several feet from the open doorway, a colorful assortment of flashlights duct taped to its legs. The others held behind it as though it were a brick wall. For a time, the bar was still. No one inside knew how much time passed before the silence was broken with an impatient sigh as Frank shifted in his seat. One of the flashlights had died shortly after its installation. Two others threatened to follow suit, flashing and dimming precariously. Each fluctuation filled the survivors with dread as the twanging snaps of a frayed lifeline dangling them above certain doom. They were situated much closer now, for fear of another breach. Sheriff Gillard had once again hoisted himself onto the bar and fallen asleep. Walter held his place behind the counter, one hand wrapped firmly around the wooden stock of his 12-gauge. Bradford and Dolores sat together, with the Larsons nearby. Frank took it upon himself to raid a bottle of whiskey from the bar and promptly drained it. He muttered darkly into his hands, angrily at first, but devolving into pitiful blubbering as he drank. Jack eyed him nervously. The others had noticed. They stared blankly into the floor, processing the assault. It was not until Frank raised his shaken voice through his fingers that anyone but Jack could understand. "Oh, hell with this. Hell with you folks," he rambled. "The hell are you talking about, Frank?" Bradford demanded, sitting up. "You heard me. Hell with y'all. Never liked any of you anyway. Think I'm out in them woods all day for food? Shit, whole fucking town's better off dead. Gotta drag that thing along with..." He stopped. Jack scowled at him hatefully. "What in all hell's gotten into you, Frank? What are you saying?" The others were standing now, approaching him slowly. "Y'all just back the fuck up now," Frank shouted, pulling a handgun from his belt. They stepped back, hands raised. "Easy, Frank. We got enough trouble going on now without this. Let's just talk now, all right?" Bradford tried to ease his voice. Frank plopped into his chair with a groan, his gun still haphazardly raised towards the others. "Y'all don't know what it's like. I tried, damn it. I tried so hard to keep him in line, but he just ain't right. First I thought he liked to work with his pa. We go out and snag a buck, dress it, haul it off proud like. Shit. But he just couldn't leave him alone. I'd find him poking and cutting at him, hanging up in the shop. Whipped him good. Messing up a clean kill like that just made him sneakier." They stared at him, mouths agape. "Frank, what are you saying?" Dolores nearly whispered, her lip trembling with fear. Jack remained silent, slipping behind his father and looking at his feet. "He found something in the woods, something like him, something evil. Couldn't tell you what, but he'd run off at night, clean, and sneak back bloodier in hell come first light. Police just had to keep prying. Weren't none of their business. This was between a man and his boy. Couldn't figure a damn thing out anyway, useless assholes. Would have been fine, but... Janine..." Walter's nostrils flared angrily. He pulled his shotgun from behind the counter and placed the sights between Frank's sunken eyes. "You mean to tell me that little brat had something to do with my Janine? Huh? Talk, you drunk son of a bitch, or I'm opening a new window in here." "Walt, I'm sorry. I tried, Walt. He was doing things to them cows. I found him out there in the hills. Found the dogs and cats too, gutted, just messed all to hell. What's a father to do? It weren't right, weren't natural. I whooped him, hollered at him, hell, I even begged him. That night I found her strung up in the woods. Eyes out like them other freaks, burned out of her damn head. He was just standing there, swinging that Fucking cutting torch around and giggling like a schoolboy, Frank bawled. I've heard enough. I don't know about you folks, but I say that little bastard has overstayed his welcome here. Walter pumped a shell into the chamber and shifted his aim to Jack. Don't you hurt my boy, Frank yelled, finding his feet and raising his handgun. He fired, catching Walter in the chest. Walter spun, blowing a hole in the wall right over Dolores' shoulder. He dropped to the ground, hopelessly clutching the wound and gasping for breath. Gillard sprang to life at the sudden noise, drunkenly turning on his stool. 7 shots later, Frank Larson collapsed onto the table behind him. Gillard's revolver smoked lazily. It slipped from his hand, laying hot and empty at his feet. He had taken a bullet to his stomach and slouched into his stool, barely conscious. Bradford again tried to keep Dolores from harm. He dragged her away from the others, only to find claws reaching from the fresh crack of darkness behind them. They grasped at him wildly, pulling him out into the night. Dolores screamed in panic, tripping over his outstretched hands and falling victim just the same. They were drawn outside, cursing and crying into oblivion, until silence struck the bar once more. Jack rose from behind his father's dripping body. He looked down at him pensively, reaching for Frank's eyes and closing them. Behind the bar, Walter coughed harshly and bled out. Hearing this, Jack hopped over the base of a broken chair and found his way beyond the counter, humming to himself. He crouched over the barkeep's soggy t-shirt. It read, "Get busy drinking or get busy dying." He grinned at the irony. The lights flickered above him, dancing their way through the multicolored bottles which lined the shelves. Jack had always despised alcohol and those who abused it. Finally free of them, he laughed aloud and lobbed several bottles against the wall, causing them to shatter and rain their contents over the ground. Sighing contentedly, he stepped onto Walter's chest and departed for the door. Gillard hiccuped as he passed, looking up at him solemnly. The sheriff took a clumsy sip of his bourbon and called after his killer. "Son, what you done here can't be undone. Your friends, your pa, everyone's gone now. Do you understand? You can't get 'em back. You're gonna have to live with this. This kind of thing, it don't go away." Jack chuckled and turned to face him. As he did, the lights began to shudder violently. Amid the gaps of darkness, Gillard could only faintly detect pairs of burning red eyes closing in on him. They were held off only at the doorway, its frame still barely lit by the little tower. "No, Sheriff, can't you see?" Jack kicked the stool over, swallowing all remaining light. Gillard looked up one last time to see red hovering inches from his face. "They're all right here."
Holy crap, Miles. You were absolutely right.
I know, right? This dark roast kicks ass.
You get a pass on the coffee. This recording, though. Miles, this is amazing. When I mentioned that this technology could be used to record and play back information from anywhere, it was just a theory. I never thought that whoever's using the signal would have developed it that far.
Amazing is one word for it. Try unsettling. God knows I won't be singing in the shower anytime soon.
True. Now that would be worthy of the horror shtick the broadcaster is using.
And speaking of horror, there's the second recording.
Miles, I know that one seems to have you shaken up, but I don't know why you won't let me listen to it.
It's personal. Besides, there's someone I'd like to talk to about it, but can't wake them up right now.
Nice to know someone's going to get their beauty sleep.
I'm sorry about that, Amy. I guess I panicked a little. I needed someone's help to figure this out, and you're the only one I trusted to actually believe me.
All right. You can't show me the second one for personal reasons. I get that. But I've been thinking about how someone could pull this off, and the only way I can think of is some kind of enforced quantum entanglement.
Little over my head there.
Okay, putting it a little more simply, entanglement is where two different particles sync with each other. Basically, they start operating as a part of a system, and once they do, they never really stop. They could be separated by millions of miles, but altering one would still change the other. It's just theoretical, but it could even work across universes.
So, we're not just talking about being able to record and send sound anywhere, are we? You also mean that someone could send something more physical.
Well, I suppose so. Why do you ask?
Look, like I said, I don't want you to listen to that second tape just yet, but I think something happened. Something that might be dangerous. You need to figure this thing out and fast. A way to block it. Switch it off if necessary.
Miles, that's a tall order. I mean, without access to better equipment, we're basically working in the dark. We need more hard data on this thing. Is there any way we could get access to some of the equipment at Aerotech? You used it to pick up the signal in the first place, so maybe we could use it to gather more information.
God, no. Truth is, I was kind of playing fast and loose with the rules when I brought you in. Besides, old purse strings would probably throw a fit.
Purse strings?
Yeah, it's a nickname for my boss. He's not the most fun guy to work for.
Miles, I know he might be a pain in the ass, but whatever's on that second tape clearly has you concerned. And if you want answers, want them fast at least, this is what we have to do.
Alright, looks like we're off to see the wizard. Got anything stiff I could put in this coffee? I think I'm gonna need it.
Some roads are better left untraveled. Whether the twisting pathways of life's many decisions, or the more literal ones that we traverse every day, certain roads lead nowhere that anyone would wish to go. Such is the subject of today's local broadcast, dedicated to Emily Reynolds of St. Louis, Missouri. Known to many as the Gateway to the West, St. Louis has a strong history of unnatural phenomenon, so much so that one could be forgiven for thinking that the city was a gateway to something else entirely. Emily's love of the strange and unnatural will lead her down many new paths in life, but the one she should avoid at all costs rests just a short distance away, down a place called Zombie Road. Built upon the Mississippi as a trading post, St. Louis has long been a place where travelers could embark into the frontier. It is a borderland between the safe and the strange, the familiar and the unmapped lands beyond. From the exploration of the Louisiana Purchase by Lewis and Clark, to the endless wagon trains of eager settlers hurtling themselves into the unknown, some finding riches, others vanishing into the wilderness, it has ever been a city where one could follow the road less traveled. And if there is such a road, it's Rock Hollow Trail. Known by many names over the course of its existence, Rock Hollow sits to the west of the city, in a place called Wildwood. Once known as Glencoe, Wildwood more certainly describes the region's origins, an untamed tangle of trees and brush before the encroachment of the modern world. Although, that's not to say that the region was uninhabited. Long before the first settlers forged their way across the plains, the region was host to a vast city of as many as 40,000 people. This civilization, who constructed massive earthen mounds for ceremonial and religious purposes, vanished long before any outsider laid eyes on the West, leaving their works behind. One wonders if the first settlers in the area marveled at them as they made their way west through the growing hub of activity in the 1800s. Perhaps so, or perhaps they were too busy struggling with the rugged landscape of cliffs, forests, and quickly flooding rivers. Regardless, settle they did. Trading posts, grist mills, tanneries. For nearly 60 years, this isolated stretch of wilderness was slowly tamed as civilization grew. And as it did, a certain trail through the wilderness began to take shape. At first, simply a trodden path through the forest, the locals began haphazardly making it more passable with gravel and other materials. Because of this, when the Civil War came to Missouri, spies and rebels from the South found it an attractive path, as did the defending Home Guard, who staged several bloody ambushes there. This killing ground would eventually become known as Lawler Ford Road, and later Rock Hollow Trail. As the country licked its wounds, industry continued. The mills expanded, a better road was needed, and Lawler became a steady trail. Still, there was something about it that many found unsettling. Shrouded heavily by trees that left it in a perpetual twilight, many were heard saying that it never seemed the same length twice, that it occasionally felt as though it would stretch on forever, with no end. A rail line was constructed to carry materials through the area, and while one might think this would remove the somber pall throughout the area, numerous deaths during its building, and one from an accident on the rails after it was operational, only soured the area's reputation further. It's at this point that the first rumblings of the supernatural surface about Lawler Ford Road. Shadows that looked like men standing amongst the trees as people passed, a pale woman that seemed to give off a blue glow near the rail line. Ignoring these rumors, others tried to develop the area, unsuccessfully. The buildings set up along the river fell to ruin, becoming shacks and ruins. Rumors and stories of increasingly strange phenomenon, including a woman who would scream at passers-by from the porch of a crumbling home, only to disappear when investigated closer, began to circulate. By the 1950s, the road, secluded and falling to ruin, had become a hangout for local teenagers despite the best efforts of the local police to keep it clear. At night, they would park in one of the many secluded bends of the road for a bit of personal exploration. However, what was meant to be a private moment wasn't always so. Several of the young couples reported being attacked by a man suspected to be a killer escaped from a local asylum, and living in the ruined buildings dotting Lawler. This man, known for his unsettling stare and gaunt features, quickly gained the local nickname, the Zombie, and the threat of him not only served to clear the road of youthful trespassers, but also provided Lawler Ford Road with a new nickname, Zombie Road. In the following decades, Zombie Road's supernatural reputation only increased. Strange photographs of unexplained phenomena surfaced, and there were rumors of cults conducting bizarre rituals at night. Ghost hunters and thrill seekers would walk the trail at night, often leaving quickly when the oppressive atmosphere became too much. The city of Wildwood, realizing that their town was attracting too much attention for all the wrong reasons, set about a campaign of renewal in the area. The gates to the road were chained, a police presence was established. The shacks and ancient reminders of a time long past were torn down. Today, due to development and a concentrated effort on the part of the city, Zombie Road is relegated to a narrow strip of greenery, most of the unsettling ruins and relics of the past swept away. Open to the public, it attracts few visitors during the day. But, guarded by police, the entrances and exits chained shut, no one is allowed there at night.
So, care to tell me more about this purse strings guy?
Percy Purse Strings Stringer, bureaucrat extraordinaire, crosses every T, dots every I, and makes absolutely sure his name appears in the first two paragraphs of every major discovery his division makes.
I'm familiar with the type. Something tells me we'll get along like a house on fire.
Here's hoping. If you two wound up besties, I'd start to wonder just how good of a judge of character I was.
Miles, I know you don't want me to hear the second recording, and I know what's on it frightens you. Badly. If you don't want me listening, that's okay, but can you tell me what it is that has you shaken up?
My son. I don't know exactly what happened. If what's on that tape is real or some kind of threat. I hope it's only the second. Last night, in the rain, I think they might have sent something for him.
Jesus, you mentioned him before. Why didn't you want to talk to him about it?
Want to? Of course I want to. That's easier said than done. Alex's mother. There was a car accident about a year ago. After we didn't really talk much, I needed time, so did he, but that time got longer and longer. I guess we just kind of moved in different directions. It's all I have left, but so far away. Look, it's tough to explain, and I don't know that you'd be able to understand even if I did, so we let it drop.
I'm sorry. And you're right. I'm pretty bright, but I'm glad there are some things I'll never have to understand. Now, let's figure out how we can keep your son safe.
When one is in danger, it's only natural to seek help. But when you're desperate, you're also vulnerable, and there are those who can take advantage of your weakness. These predators often wear the mask of a friend, but it's a different mask entirely that the subject of our next tale wears. In this story, from author Brad Eddy, a man living in a small village in the time of the Black Plague witnesses atrocities at the hands of both nature and his fellow man, driven by the sickness that threatens to consume them all. But when an unusual kind of doctor arrives in his village, he soon finds that the cure may be worse than the disease. At least, it is at the hands of the Crow Man. The crow is a maligned bird. They speak of death and ill omens, and it seems cruel that they were the last thing many of us saw before the pestilence carried us away. Of course, the avian variety were attracted to the dead. What better proof that they were the angels of Lucifer than their ability to consume the flesh of our fallen, without contracting the pest themselves? Yet these are not the crows of which I speak. I refer to the men and women that donned the beakish masks and black cassocks, with only herbs, spices, camphor, and vinegar sponges wired to the fell miasmatic humours that carried the pestilence. Even if their hearts were not true, and many were not, they were with the dying and wretched as they breathed their last. A final human caress, in spirit if not in visage. With what little time I have left, and with my final breath, I will damn their accursed guild. We had been mercifully spared by the pestilence during the early years. Even as it burned through the neighbouring villages, we remained untouched. I confess that at times we used perhaps unchristian methods to preserve ourselves, or perhaps not as charitable with those seeking refuge as the book teaches. But our sins, great and small, seemed to act as proof against the death. If only we could weather the storm, if only we could survive to repent, then God would forgive us our transactions. We were safe. But then it began. It was the crofter's wife that first fell ill. She brewed a fine ale and had well-behaved children. She could play the flute. The pest ate her away in less than a week. That was all the time that it took to drove the village to madness. One cough, one sniffle, and a mob of terrified and furious people would appear in the night at the doorsteps of lifelong friends with torches, demanding maidens of only 10 summers and white beards with stooped backs alike to strip to their skin and expose their groins and underarms. These were the lucky ones. Some would dispense altogether with the inspections and set fire to the homes without ceremony. This was the alderman's fate, who was burned alive, along with his wife and 5 daughters, for he was accused of harboring his sick son away from public view. The man claimed that he had sent his son away to forage a week before the sickness came, and the villagers, unwilling to enter his house in search of him for fear of becoming afflicted themselves, threw torches through his windows and barred the door from the outside. The very next day, the boy returned to the ashes that had once been his home and family, carrying bushels of wild berries and a carved stag for his youngest sister.
None among us met his eye. So it was that when we saw the wagon approach, our apprehensions grew to outright hysteria. For if we could not trust our own neighbours, what hope did a stranger have? Yet as the wagon approached, our suspicion changed into delight, as we saw the telltale curved beak and black cassock of a plague doctor. Cheers held forth as the smell of pungent herbs and incense trailed from behind the visitor. Our prayers had been answered, it seemed. The carriage came to a stop in the town centre, and its driver stepped down into the street. He was extremely tall and thin, with a wide-brimmed hat that extended almost beyond his sharp beak, and his black vestments hung over him, obscuring the body that lay beneath. As we crowded around him, he did not speak. He looked from one of us to the other through his mirrored eye holes, a muffled, oddly affectionate cooing emanating from behind his mask. He finally stopped on Jacques, the barber, and swiftly stepped towards him. The men and women around him sprang away as if he had suddenly burst into flames, and Jacques, eyes mad with panic, attempted to persuade us of his purity. The doctor closed the distance quickly, and with a deft slash of his hidden cane, tore open the barber's shirt, revealing the purple buboes that had sprouted from the juncture of his shoulder and neck. All of the defiance in Jacques drained from him, like a punctured wineskin, and he sank to his knees and made sounds of the blackest despair. The crowd teetered on the edge of frenzy, torn between thrashing the man and fleeing from his presence, but the doctor merely cooed, draped a long-sleeved arm around Jack, and guided him into the wagon. The beaked mask turned towards us, the last of the day's sun reflecting in the glass eye-holes, and then the door was shut. We stood watching for some time, well after the darkness had overtaken us. Some of the boys even lit a fire so that we could watch. Soon fatigue overcame our curiosity, and we retired for the night, tasking one of the lads to keep watch until morning. That night, I dreamed of a lone mill, spinning against a current of maggots that moved like a stream into the distance. In the morning, the lad was nowhere to be found. We discovered the doctor perched atop his wagon, watching Jacques as he knelt in subjection, in thanks for his rehabilitation. The man stood, proudly showing off his unblemished body and shouting benedictions. We heard that, while it was possible to survive the pest once blighted, the appearance of buboes was death. And yet here was Jacques, as hale as if he were a man 10 years younger. Many of us were wroth for his deception, for nearly infecting the entire town, but soon others stepped forth to confess that they too had been concealing loved ones or their own afflictions. Even Hugo, who was rumored to have hurled the first torch into the alderman's house, desperately removed his trousers and revealed the egg-sized lump protruding from the base of his sex. The doctor saw to them all. It must have been a strange thing to be a plague doctor, greeted as a savior and then shunned directly after the saving. Yet it was so. Those of us that had not been afflicted were thankful for the doctor. We also shunned him and those he cured. We would not allow them in public places, save for the town square, where they congregated each day, bestowing gifts upon the Crowman, as we had taken to calling him. While we tended our fields, they tended to the Crowman. While we worshipped in the chapel, the cursed villagers held court with the Crowman, who never spoke, but cooed approvingly at the songs they sang him and the gifts they laid before his wagon. In the weeks that followed the Crowman's arrival, things began to deteriorate around the village. Throngs of worshippers, for there was no other word to describe them now, gathered around the wagon. I began to notice men and women who had not been afflicted had joined his congregation and sang Ave Marias and Pater Nosters as passionately as any that had been. In this time, I noted that beneath the cloying stench of incense and herbs, there was something foul, something rotten. Also throughout this time, I was haunted by terrible nightmares. Bleak landscapes of thorny, naked trees and ghastly apparitions of things that were hardly men, and worse things besides. I would wake from one nightmare and into other, more horrible fantasies. I prayed as fervently as I ever have, and yet my torment persisted. Nearly a third of the town had been converted to the Crowman's flock before our own vicar was roused into action. He took the good book into his hands and walked through the crowd, naming the interlopers as blasphemers and worshippers of false idols. To the Crowman himself, he directed his most scathing admonishments. Throughout the tirade, the Crowman remained perched atop his wagon, silently watching the vicar, who was eventually forced into retreat, though not before reminding all gathered that nothing short of hellfire awaited those who did not turn from this path. The next day, the town square was empty, and nobody ever saw the vicar again. We searched for our lost neighbors, but could not find them, though perhaps we did not look as hard as we could have. We tried to put them from our minds and continue with our lives. The plague seemed to have run its course, and for that much we were thankful. Many nights had been dreamless, for 3 days after the Crowman's exodus, and I slept soundly. But it was not to last, and my final, most horrible nightmare was to come. I dreamed that I was walking barefoot in a dark forest, as dark as it gets. I came upon a clearing, illuminated by a magnificent orange moon, and in the center was an enormous gnarled tree. All around it knelt naked men and women, hands clasped before them and fervently, frantically praying. I recognized these people. There were Jacques and Hugo, Sabine, who had been a wet nurse to my son, and now 4 seasons dead, and Camille, who made bread. I saw the young boy that had stood watch that first night, and many others besides. Every face among them was contorted with an expression of complete ecstasy. And at the base of the tree stood the Crowman, or something very much like him. Instead of his glass eye holes, there were those of a crow, black and beady, soulless. The beaked mask, once constructed of leather and filled with herbs, spices, camphor, and vinegar sponge, was now a true beak and open, revealing a thin red tongue. From it came a loathsome barking and quarking, all the sounds of the carrion bird of its namesake. Its cassock was thrown open, and I saw that it was not a cassock at all, but black wings that flapped and ruffled, sending feathers cascading into the congregation. Its feet were avian claws that clicked and slashed at the ground and air. Its legs were bent back where a human knee should have been. I did not scream then, for I could not bring myself to, and I do not recall if I did after, for what I saw next caused my mind to leave me. There, like an unholy altar, was the body of our vicar, impaled upon a spike through the anus and out the mouth. The congregation staggered to its feet and formed a crowd around this baleful totem, and the Crowman, who stood like a mockery of the pontiff before them. Each fell to their knees and turned their heads skyward, mouths hanging open. The Crowman did in kind, and a low cooing sound escaped his throat. A bulge had begun to grow in its belly, and then worked its way upward, first to the chest, then to the throat, until it finally stopped in its mouth, the cheeks distended. And then it began to feed its flock. A black ichor, writhing with maggots, erupted from the Crowman's beak onto the faces of those that knelt before it, and then began to gorge themselves on the unholy sacrament. Another powerful heave, and more putrid excretions saturated the revelers who, I now realized with fresh horror, had begun to copulate in the stew, their cries of pleasure indistinguishable from screams of agony. The last thing I saw, before my wits left me entirely, was the face of the Crowman look up from the orgy and into my eyes. I woke in my bed screaming openly. It did not stop for some time after. When I finally regained myself, I lay whimpering on the floor next to my bed, soaked in urine and vomit. In the silence, I thought I could hear the distant flapping of wings. The next day, I tried to forget the dream. I tried to forget the face of the Crowman as he stared at me across that accursed field. I tried to ignore the mud in between my toes. I knew that I had gone mad, but soon I learned that I would not live long enough for that to make much of a difference. You see, I now feel the tenderness in my groin and under my arms, and know that the pest has come to carry me off, as it has so many others. But even if mad I am, I will not seek the Crow Man. I will die a Christian, and thankfully go to my reward. But as the days wear on, I wonder if my faith will hold. I wonder if my resolve will waver once the boobas begin to appear. Perhaps then my courage will falter, and I will yearn for life as I once did. And still other times, I wonder if my senses will return, and I will go out into the woods, like so many others before me have done, to enter into the congregation of the Crow Man.
One should always be wary of strangers bearing gifts, but then we're not strangers to one another, are we, listener? And as always, we have a gift for you, an opportunity to add your voice to our own, here at The Signal. Remember, though, that while admission is free, the price you pay for making the crossing may be steep indeed. To those who are not discouraged, we present to you this week's test pattern.
Hello, and welcome to the test pattern. Decipher the code and return your answers to thisisthesignal@gmail.com. The first subject to do so will become the focal point of our next local broadcast. Today's cipher is 20 19 1 3 4 1 15 18 2. Again, please submit all answers to thisisthesignal@gmail.com.
This is absolutely astonishing. If what you're saying is correct, you may have stumbled onto something that can revolutionize the entire communications industry.
That's the part you're picking up on? We've just told you that we found something that literally shouldn't be. This thing is not only being used to spy on people, but it could be doing something much, much worse.
Look, I know you've been through some odd experiences, but that's really no reason to ignore the potential that this project represents. Also, I'd like to point out that your extremely erratic behavior, Dr. Tegan, renders your judgment suspect.
Look, Percy.
That's Director Stringer to you, Tegan. You've withheld important data on a potentially valuable new asset, invited an outside consultant into a high-security area without so much as asking for clearance, and now you're trying to stop research into said asset because you've had what, in all honesty, sounds like a bad dream. Quite frankly, I'm considering demanding a full psychological evaluation before I restore your security clearance.
That is entirely unfair. You're ignoring evidence that this project could be dangerous.
Look, Ms. Miller.
Dr. Miller, you officious little prick. And if you took one look at my credentials, you'd know that you should be listening to me.
Now listen here. I'm calling security and...
Whoa, Amy, calm down. It's very clear that Director Stringer has made up his mind. There, keycard to my lab. Take a look at whatever you need to, and I'm sure you'll get in touch if you have any questions.
See? You can be reasonable, Dr. Tegan. And because of that, I'll do you the courtesy of allowing you two to see yourselves out rather than having security do it. Now, as I'm going to be quite busy, I'm going to have to say good day.
But...
Amy, come on.
Ugh! And why the hell would you do that? What possible chance do we have of figuring this thing out now? Jesus, Miles.
I did what I had to do.
What you had to do? God, I thought you were different, but...
Look, giving him my parking pass was a hard thing to do.
Your parking pass?
I know we're going to have to call an Uber, but I'm more than willing to take the cost.
Miles? What the hell are you talking about?
You didn't think I'd actually give him the card key to my lab, did you?
I could kiss you.
I have to take a rain check on that. Dial us up a ride. I'll head over to the lab and grab the receiver. If we can't get any help, we'll figure this out on our own. One way or another. Hi everyone, Leslie Rice again, and I'd like to thank you one more time for joining us today. Today's narration comes courtesy of yours truly and Ashley Webb Rice. The music, as always, comes partly from myself, but a much larger part from Kevin MacLeod, whose work you can find at incompetech.com. Please remember to like, subscribe, and support us. Subscribing at patreon.com/signalobscura gets you exclusive news updates and other benefits, such as access to episodes 3 days before anyone else, and more. And if you aren't able to contribute financially, please remember to recommend us to your friends or anyone else who will listen. More listeners, reviews, and ratings means more people can find us, and the more we can continue to grow. If you find yourself reluctant, you should ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen?